The sun hung low in the autumn sky, casting a golden hue over the quaint little town where we lived. It was the kind of afternoon that made you want to breathe deeply, soak in the crisp air, and relish the fading warmth before winter's chill set in. Jake, Emily, and I decided to spend our Saturday exploring the local thrift shop, a treasure trove of forgotten items waiting to be rediscovered. As we entered the shop, the familiar scent of aged wood and mothballs enveloped us. The walls were lined with shelves crammed full of knickknacks, old books, and clothes that seemed to whisper stories of their past lives. Jake was the first to break the silence. "All right, let's see what gems we can dig up today. Last time I found a vintage video game console. Who knows what I'll score today?" He grinned, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "More like junk. Remember that hideous vase you brought home last time? I still can't believe you thought it was a good idea to put that in our living room." Jake chuckled, his laughter ringing through the shop. "Hey, that vase had character. You just don't appreciate fine art." As they bickered, I felt my mind wander. I loved these moments with my friends, the light-hearted banter that made us forget about the pressures of college life. I drifted towards the back of the store, where a dim light flickered over a shelf stacked with dusty vase tapes, relics of a bygone era. My fingers brushed over the spines, each one a promise of nostalgia. Ghost stories, slasher flicks, and heartwarming romances from the 80s. Then, amidst the clutter, something caught my eye. A single, unmarked tape lay haphazardly on the shelf, covered in a fine layer of dust. I picked it up, squinting at the label. It read, "Do not watch." My heart raced, a mix of curiosity and apprehension coursing through me. I turned to Jake and Emily, who had followed me. "Guys, check this out," I said, holding the tape up for them to see. Jake leaned in closer, a playful smirk on his face. "What's it say? Do not watch? Sounds like a challenge." Emily frowned, her brows knitting together. "That's just creepy. We should leave it alone." But Jake was already shaking his head, the excitement radiating from him. "Come on, it's probably just some weird indie film. We can't let a little warning scare us off. I mean, what's the worst that could happen?" I could see the glint of mischief in his eyes, and despite my reservations, I felt a tug of curiosity. "You really think we should? Could be something dangerous. Or it could be the find of the century." Jake countered, his enthusiasm infectious. "We can't just leave it here. Think of the stories we'll have." Emily sighed, her reluctance evident. "I don't know, guys. There's probably a reason it's labeled that way." But before she could voice any more objections, Jake had already made up his mind. He marched to the counter, paid a few crumpled bills to the elderly shopkeeper, and returned with the tape in hand, a triumphant grin plastered across his face. "See? Easy as pie," he said, puffing out his chest in mock victory. As we left the store, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping in. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I glanced at the tape nestled in Jake's backpack, the warning label now feeling more ominous than before. "Jake, do you really think we should watch it?" I asked hesitantly, trying to sound nonchalant. He waved his hand dismissively. "You're worrying too much. It's just a tape. What could possibly go wrong?" Emily shot me a look that mirrored my own concern. "I just think we should be careful. It's not like a warning label is there for no reason. Come on, you two. Where's your sense of adventure?" Jake teased, nudging Emily playfully. "We're college students. We're supposed to do reckless things like this." We made our way back to our apartment, the air thick with anticipation and a hint of dread. As we entered, I felt a shiver run down my spine, but Jake was already setting up the VCR. He plugged it in with the vigor of a kid on Christmas morning. "All right, let's see what horrors await us," he said, his voice booming with excitement. Emily and I exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that we were in this together, for better or worse. I took a seat on the couch, feeling the worn fabric beneath me, and watched as Jake inserted the tape. The VCR whirred to life, and the screen flickered, slowly revealing grainy images. The first thing I noticed was a forest, a dark, foreboding place filled with towering trees that seemed to stretch into infinity. As the camera panned, I could make out figures moving in the shadows, cloaked in dark robes. My heart raced, and I felt a chill spread through the room. "What the hell?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Jake chuckled nervously. "It's probably just some low-budget horror flick. Look at how fake that looks." But as the scene progressed, the atmosphere shifted. The chanting began, low, guttural voices that echoed around the room, sending shivers down my spine. Emily's hand gripped the edge of the couch, her knuckles turning white. "Jake, maybe we should turn it off," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just give it a chance," he insisted, his eyes glued to the screen. "It might get better." As the ritual unfolded, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over me. The hooded figures gathered around a small fire, their movements synchronized in a way that felt unsettlingly choreographed. The chanting grew louder, and I could feel the air thickening, almost suffocating. When the tape ended abruptly, plunging us into silence, a heavy stillness enveloped the room. I glanced at Jake and Emily, both of whom wore expressions that mirrored my own. Confusion mixed with fear. The weight of what we had just witnessed hung in the air like a dark cloud. "What the hell was that?" I finally managed to say, my voice shaky. Jake's bravado had faded, replaced by a rare look of uncertainty. I don't know. It was just a movie, right?" Emily shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, it felt real. Like we were watching something we shouldn't have." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second feeling like an eternity. I glanced at the tape, its unassuming exterior now tinged with an ominous aura. The warning label seemed to loom larger in my mind, a reminder that we had crossed a line. "Maybe we should just go to bed," I suggested, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. "It's late, and we can talk about it in the morning." Emily nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She stood up, still pale, and walked toward her room. Jake followed, though his usual confidence seemed to have slipped away. As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me. My mind replayed the images from the tape, the chanting echoing in the recesses of my thoughts. I stared at the ceiling, feeling a strange sense of foreboding settle over me. What had we done? What had we unleashed? The shadows in my room danced in the dim light, and for a moment, I swore I could hear whispers drifting through the air, faint but unmistakable. I pressed my hands to my ears, willing myself to silence the noise, but it clung to me like a dark shroud. The night dragged on, and I found myself staring into the dark, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me from within the shadows. I closed my eyes, hoping for sleep to claim me, but the images from the tape replayed relentlessly, and the unease settled deeper than before. I didn't know what we had stumbled upon, but I had a sinking feeling that it was only the beginning. The crisp autumn air filled our small apartment as Jake, Emily, and I gathered around the TV, the old VCR humming to life with a familiar whir. The anticipation hung heavy in the room, a mix of excitement and an undercurrent of unease. We had just returned from the thrift store, our hands clutching a dusty VHS tape we couldn't resist. The label read, "Do not watch," in faded, scrawled letters, and though it sent shivers down our spines, curiosity had won over caution. "Come on, it's probably just some lame horror movie," Jake said, trying to lighten the mood. He had a knack for turning everything into a joke, but there was a nervous twitch in his smile. "It's not like we're going to summon a demon or anything." Emily rolled her eyes, but I could see the flicker of fear in her gaze. "You really think we should be doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if it really is cursed or something?" "Oh, please," Jake scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just a tape. Can't be that bad." He plopped down on the couch, patting the seat next to him. "We're just going to have a good time. Right, Tom?" I hesitated, caught between the urge to dive into the unknown and the nagging voice that warned me we were making a grave mistake. "I guess we'll find out," I murmured, joining them on the couch. As we settled in, the dim light of the flickering screen cast eerie shadows across the room. I reached for the remote, feeling the weight of the moment as I pressed play. The familiar static crackled to life, and for a brief second, I felt as if we were standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss. The screen flickered, revealing a darkened forest. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their twisted branches reaching for the sky. An unsettling feeling washed over me as hooded figures emerged, their movements fluid and deliberate, as if they were dancing to a rhythm only they could hear. I glanced at Emily, who had instinctively scooted closer to me, her fingers tightening around the edge of the couch. "Is this real?" she whispered, her eyes wide, reflecting the dim light of the TV. "I mean, it's a tape," Jake replied, attempting to sound nonchalant. "It's probably just some creepy art project or something." But the tension in the room thickened as we watched the figures perform a ritual, their chants echoing through the silence. The words were foreign, slithering into my mind like a serpent, wrapping around my thoughts. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Jake, turn it off," Emily said suddenly, her voice trembling. This is too much. "Just a little longer," he insisted, though his bravado was faltering. "We can't just stop now." The chanting intensified, a cacophony of voices that seemed to seep into the very fabric of the room. I felt the air grow heavier, pressing down on us as if the very atmosphere was warning us to turn back. And then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the tape cut to black. A deafening silence enveloped us, leaving only the sound of our ragged breaths. "What the hell was that?" I finally asked, breaking the stillness that had settled over us like a shroud. Jake exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, man. It was weird. But it's just a movie, right?" Emily shook her head, her expression a mix of fear and disbelief. "No, that felt different. Like it was real." I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. "Yeah, I felt it too." It was almost like, before I could finish, the screen flickered back to life for a moment, revealing a glimpse of the hooded figures once more, their faces obscured but their intentions clear. I could feel my heart racing, pounding against my ribcage like a caged animal desperate to escape. "Is it over?" Jake asked, his bravado fading. "It can't just end like that." "It's done," I stated, almost to convince myself. Let's just go to bed." The three of us sat in silence for a moment longer, the weight of our thoughts pressing down. Finally, we agreed to turn off the TV and call it a night. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, sleep eluded me. My mind raced with images from the tape, the chanting echoing in the recesses of my thoughts. I turned to my side, trying to push the unsettling feelings away, but they clung to me like a shadow. The next morning came too quickly, the sun streaming through the window, but the warmth offered little comfort. I rolled over, expecting to see Jake sprawled on the couch, but the space was empty. Panic began to creep into my chest as I glanced at my phone. No messages, no missed calls, nothing. "Jake?" I called out, my voice tinged with concern. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and padded into the living room, Emily already there, her brow furrowed in worry. "Have you seen him?" she asked, her eyes darting around the room. "He wasn't in his bed." I shook my head, my heart racing. "No, I thought he was with you." The weight of dread settled deeper as we both began to search the apartment, checking every nook and cranny. We called his name, but the only sound that returned was the echo of our voices. I grabbed my phone, dialing his number, but it went straight to voicemail. "God, where is he?" Emily whispered, her anxiety palpable. "What if something happened to him?" "Let's go to his place," I suggested, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe he just went for a walk or something." We hurried to Jake's apartment, the unease growing with each step. When we arrived, the door was slightly ajar, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. "Jake?" I called out again, my voice trembling slightly. The apartment was eerily quiet, and my stomach twisted with dread. I stepped inside, the faint smell of something metallic lingering in the air. I glanced around and noticed a half-empty bottle of water on the table, along with a notebook we knew Jake kept for his ideas and sketches. "Look," Emily said, pointing to the notebook. I picked it up, flipping through the pages until I stopped at one that made my blood run cold. There, drawn in frantic strokes, was a figure resembling one of those hooded figures from the tape. "What the hell?" I breathed, my hands shaking as I turned the page. The drawings were disturbing. Symbols I didn't recognize, and frantic notes about dreams and visions that made no sense. "This isn't good. Maybe he's just messing with us," Emily offered weakly, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "Yeah, but why would he leave like this?" I countered. "This isn't just a joke." I dialed Jake's number again, my heart racing as the phone rang and rang. "We need to find him," I said, panic rising in my throat. "Something's wrong." As we left his apartment, the weight of uncertainty hung over us like a storm cloud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had just taken a dark turn. The ominous presence of the tape loomed over us, and I felt a chilling realization wash over me. Whatever we had witnessed the night before was just the beginning. The morning light streamed through the window, casting a soft glow on the walls of our small apartment. I woke up to the sound of Emily's voice, calling out Jake's name. My heart raced as I turned over, still groggy from a night filled with nightmares. "Jake?" I mumbled, my eyes still heavy. The memories of last night flooded back, the unsettling images from the Vegas tape replaying in my mind like a broken record. "Jake!" Emily cried out again, her voice tinged with panic. I shot up in bed, adrenaline surging through me. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 9 a.m. Jake was supposed to be here by now. "Emily, calm down," I said, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. "He probably just overslept." "No, it's not like him," she replied, her voice breaking. I could hear the tremor of fear in her tone. "He always wakes up early. He's not answering his phone." I jumped to my feet, the weight of dread settling heavily in my stomach. "What do you mean? You tried calling?" "Yes, a dozen times. It goes straight to voicemail." Emily's eyes were wide with worry, and I could see her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. "Let's go check his place," I suggested, trying to remain calm, though the growing unease gnawed at me. "Maybe he just went for a run or something," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper, as if even saying those words was a betrayal of our fears. We quickly got dressed, our movements hurried and frantic, both of us feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. The streets felt different as we made our way to Jake's apartment. The sun shone down, but the warmth seemed distant, overshadowed by a chill that crept down my spine. I stole glances at Emily, her brow furrowed in concern, her lips pressed into a thin line. As we approached Jake's building, a sense of foreboding settled around us. "What if something happened to him?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing happened," I insisted, though uncertainty gnawed at my insides. "He's probably just busy with something." We reached his door, and I knocked, the sound echoing in the stillness of the hallway. "Jake, it's us," I called out, my voice rising with apprehension. There was no response. I knocked again, louder this time, and exchanged a worried look with Emily. "Maybe we should try opening the door," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure?" I hesitated, my instincts screaming that we shouldn't invade his privacy. But she nodded, determination etched on her face. I reached for the doorknob and turned it slowly. To my surprise, the door creaked open. "Jake?" I called again, stepping inside. The living room was empty, the curtains drawn tight, casting eerie shadows across the floor. "Jake!" Emily followed closely behind me, her eyes darting around the room. "This isn't funny," she said, her voice trembling. I walked further into the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. "Jake?" I called out, but the silence that greeted us was deafening. The air felt thick with tension, and I swallowed hard, fear creeping in. We moved into the kitchen, where Jake often left notes for us, his quirky reminders and sketches filled with inside jokes. But the space was empty, devoid of any sign of him. My stomach twisted as I glanced over the table, where I spotted a half-empty bottle of water and a notebook. "Emily, look at this," I said, picking up the notebook. "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer, her unease growing. I flipped it open, scanning the pages. The first few were filled with ideas and sketches, typical Jake. But then I turned to a page that made my blood run cold. It was a drawing of a hooded figure, eerily similar to the ones we'd seen in the tape. This isn't good," I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily leaned over my shoulder, her eyes widening as she took in the drawing. "What the hell is this?" she breathed. "I don't know, but it looks like it's from that tape," I said, panic rising. What if he saw something he shouldn't have? A chill ran down my spine as I thought of the ominous warning on the tape. "Do not watch. We need to find him," I said decisively, shoving the notebook back on the table. "He could be in trouble. Where do we even start?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly despite the chaos swirling in my mind. "Let's retrace our steps. Maybe he went back to the Breccio or somewhere nearby." Emily nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Okay, but what if he's in danger? We'll figure it out," I reassured her, though the knot in my stomach tightened. "Let's just get moving." We hurried out of Jake's apartment, and as we stepped into the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The air felt charged, almost electric, and I glanced back at Jake's door, an unsettling chill creeping over me. The streets felt different as we made our way back to the Breccio. The sun still shone brightly, but it seemed to cast long, ominous shadows, as if the world around us was holding its breath. "Do you think he could have gone back there?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Maybe," I replied, though doubt gnawed at my insides. I just can't shake this feeling that something is really wrong. The Breccio was nestled between two larger buildings, its weathered sign hanging crookedly. As we entered, the familiar scent of old wood and dust enveloped us. I scanned the aisles, searching for any sign of Jake. "Jake!" I called out, my voice echoing in the quiet space. "Do you think anyone here has seen him?" Emily asked, glancing around nervously. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the weight of despair settle heavily on my shoulders. "Let's ask the owner." We approached the counter, where a grizzled man with thinning hair was sorting through a box of trinkets. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have you seen our friend? He was here yesterday." The man looked up, squinting at us through thick glasses. "Can't say I have." "What's his name?" "Jake," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sorry, kids. Can't help you there." He shrugged, returning his attention to the box of items. "Wait, he bought a tape here yesterday." I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. "A VHS labeled, 'Do not watch'?" The man paused, his expression shifting as he focused on us. "That tape, you shouldn't have watched it. No one should. We didn't think it was real," Emily said, her voice trembling. "But now he's missing, and we think it's because of that tape." The man's eyes darkened, and he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "That tape is cursed. It's tied to something far more sinister than you can imagine. People have disappeared after watching it. You need to leave this place and never look back." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "But we have to find Jake. He's in danger." "Some things are better left alone," the man replied, his voice grave. "If you've seen the tape, you're already in its grip. You need to protect yourselves." "Protect ourselves?" I echoed, feeling the world tilt around me. What does that even mean? But the man simply shook his head, his gaze distant. "You should go. Now." "Wait!" Emily shouted, but the man had already turned away, dismissing us. I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit. "We need to get out of here," I said urgently. "This is worse than I thought." As we stepped back into the sunlight, the world outside felt different, darker, more foreboding. I could feel the weight of the tape pressing down on us, the curse wrapping around our hearts like a vice. "We have to find Jake," I said, determination surging within me. "We can't let him be another victim." Emily nodded, but her eyes were filled with uncertainty. What if we're too late? We won't be, I promised, though doubt lingered in the back of my mind. We'll find him. We just need to be smart about it. As we made our way back through the streets, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, threatening to engulf us. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that whatever we were up against, it was far beyond our understanding. As I sat across from Emily in the small, dimly lit library, the musty smell of old books filled the air, mingling with an undercurrent of anxiety that had settled deep in my stomach. The room was silent except for the soft rustle of pages as I flipped through a book detailing local legends. Every creak of the wooden shelves seemed to echo in the stillness, amplifying the tension that had begun to surround us ever since we stumbled upon that cursed VHS tape. Do you think we should really be doing this? Emily asked, her brows knitted together in concern. Her fingers tapped nervously on the table, betraying the unease she felt. What if we find something we're not meant to know? I glanced at her, trying my best to appear confident. We have to, Emily. Jake's missing and he might be in danger. We need to know what we're up against. My voice was steadier than I felt, but deep down, I was wrestling with a growing sense of dread. The old librarian, a frail man with thinning hair and spectacles perched precariously on his nose, shuffled over to us. He had been watching us with a knowing look, as if he sensed the shadows lurking behind our inquiry. You two are looking into the tape, aren't you? He asked, his voice a low whisper. Surprised, I met his gaze. Do you know something about it? He leaned in closer, lowering his voice even further. There have been disappearances in this town linked to that cursed video. It's not just a film. It's a conduit for something darker. You should be very careful. Emily's eyes widened in fear. Disappearances? What do you mean? The librarian hesitated, glancing around as if he feared being overheard. Many years ago, there was a cult that practiced dark rituals in these woods. They used tapes like that one to lure their victims. It's said that the tape shows you what it wants you to see, and once you're drawn in, there's no way out. I felt a chill run down my spine. But it's just a video, right? How can it possibly be connected to a cult? The librarian shook his head solemnly. It's not just a video. It's a gateway. Those who watched it often become obsessed, unable to escape its pull. You must understand that some things are better left untouched. Have you seen anyone who went missing? I pressed, desperate for more information. He nodded slowly, his expression grave. There was a young man, a student just like you. He watched the tape and vanished without a trace. The town was never the same after that. People began to vanish one by one, all connected to that cursed video. The cult believed they could summon a dark force by sacrificing those who watched it. Emily shivered. This can't be real. I wish it wasn't, the librarian said, his voice barely above a whisper. But it is. You need to be cautious. Many have tried to uncover the truth, but few have survived to tell the tale. What do we do? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Find out more about the cult. They used to operate in the woods. Look for signs, symbols, anything that might lead you to their rituals. But remember, if the tape has already claimed one of you, it might already be watching. As he spoke, I felt a sense of urgency swell within me. We had to find Jake before it was too late, and the librarian's warnings only fueled my determination. Thank you for your help, I said, standing up abruptly. We need to go. Emily nodded, her face pale but resolute. Let's get out of here. We left the library, the weight of the librarian's words hanging over us like a dark cloud. The town felt different now, as if we were being watched at every turn. The streets that had once seemed familiar now felt foreign and threatening. Where do we even start? Emily asked as we walked down the sidewalk, glancing nervously over her shoulder. The woods, I replied, my mind racing. That's where the cult operated. If there are any signs or symbols, we need to find them. Are you sure that's a good idea? She asked hesitantly. What if we find something, or someone, we're not ready for? We have to take the risk. We can't just sit around waiting for something to happen, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We're running out of time, As we approached the edge of the woods, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The trees loomed like sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting into the sky. The sunlight barely penetrated through the dense foliage, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Jake could be out there, I murmured, my heart pounding in my chest. Let's just be careful, Emily whispered, her voice trembling slightly. We stepped into the underbrush, the crunch of leaves beneath our feet breaking the stillness around us. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. An unsettling silence enveloped us, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant animal calls. Look, I said, pointing to a tree trunk that had strange carvings etched into its bark. They resembled symbols I had seen in the library, twisting and angular, almost like a language of its own. What do you think it means? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she traced one of the symbols with her finger. I don't know, but it has to be connected to the cult, I replied. We should take a picture of it. Maybe we can find more information later. As I pulled out my phone to snap a photo, a chill breeze swept through the clearing, sending shivers down my spine. I looked up, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Did you feel that? Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Yeah, it felt wrong. We pressed on, each step feeling heavier than the Ultimo. The woods were alive with an unsettling energy, like the air was charged with static. I felt a gnawing sense of unease creeping in, as if we were being watched. Suddenly, Emily stopped, her breath hitching in her throat. Do you hear that? I strained my ears, and in the distance, I could hear a low, rhythmic chanting. It sent a jolt of panic through me. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice urgent. But before we could turn back, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the dim light. It was a woman, her face obscured by a hood, garbed in a tattered robe. She moved with an unnatural grace, her eyes glinting like cold steel. Who are you? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman smiled, a chilling grin that sent shivers down my spine. You shouldn't have come here, she said, her voice smooth and melodic, yet laced with menace. You're not meant to be part of this. What do you mean? Emily asked, taking a step back. There are powers at play that you cannot fathom. You've awakened something that was meant to remain dormant, the woman warned, her gaze piercing through me. Where's Jake? I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. A flicker of amusement crossed her face. He is where he belongs, part of a greater design. The tape has chosen him, and now you must choose. You can't save him. You can't save yourselves. I felt a wave of panic wash over me, and I gripped Emily's arm tightly. We need to go. Now! As we turned to flee, the woman's laughter echoed behind us, chilling my bones. You can run, but you can't escape the truth. We sprinted through the underbrush, branches clawing at our clothes, heart racing as we pushed deeper into the woods. The chanting grew louder, the rhythm pounding in time with my heartbeat. Do you think she was part of the cult? Emily gasped, struggling to keep up with my pace. I don't know, but we can't let them catch us, I replied, glancing back to see if we were being followed. We finally broke through the tree-line, emerging into a clearing where the air felt lighter. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, but the sense of dread remained, gnawing at my mind. Did you see the look in her eyes? Emily panted, her face pale. It was like she knew everything. She did, I said, trying to catch my breath. This isn't over. Jake is still out there, and we need to find him before it's too late. Emily nodded, determination flickering in her gaze, but I could see the fear still lurking beneath the surface. We have to figure out what the symbols mean and how they connect to the cult. We can't let fear stop us. As we walked back towards town, a sense of resolve began to take root within me. We might not know what lay ahead, but we had to keep searching. For Jake, for ourselves, and for the truth that was hidden deep within the shadows of the past. The atmosphere around us had shifted dramatically since we first stumbled upon that cursed tape. It was as though a veil of darkness had settled over our lives, and the once vibrant colors of autumn now seemed muted and lifeless. Emily and I walked through campus, The usual chatter and laughter of students felt distant and foreign. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had happened to Jake and how that tape had led us down this treacherous path. "Do you think he's okay?" Emily's voice trembled as she walked beside me. Her eyes were filled with worry, reflecting the same anxiety that churned in my gut. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "We should have never watched that tape. Maybe it really is cursed." "I keep replaying the moment we hit play," she said, shaking her head. "What if we awaken something? What if it was all real?" A chill ran down my spine at the thought. The imagery of cloaked figures dancing around a fire, chanting in a language I couldn't understand, haunted my every waking moment. The whispers that had started shortly after watching the tape grew louder in my mind, like an incessant buzzing that refused to fade. I glanced at Emily, who was staring blankly ahead, lost in her own panic. "Hey, let's not dwell on the worst-case scenarios right now," I said, trying to inject some optimism into the air. "We need to find Jake. He wouldn't just disappear like this." "I know," she replied, her voice growing more frantic. "But what if he's in danger? What if those things from the tape are after him?" I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "We need to focus. Let's go to his apartment again. Maybe he left us a message or something." As we approached Jake's place, an eerie silence enveloped us. The door stood ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. My heart raced as I pushed it open further, the creaking hinges echoing ominously. "Jake?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Jake!" Emily shouted, her voice rising in urgency. We stepped inside, the familiar smell of his apartment mixing with an unsettling sense of foreboding. The living room was dimly lit, and everything seemed untouched, as if he had simply vanished into thin air. "He's not here," I said, a sense of dread washing over me. Emily moved toward his desk, where a few scattered papers and an open sketchbook lay. "Look at this," she said, her voice quavering. I moved closer, and my breath hitched in my throat. There, sketched in frantic strokes, was a figure cloaked in shadow, the same figure from the tape. "What the hell, Jake?" I muttered, running my fingers over the page. "What were you getting into?" "Maybe he was trying to figure it out," Emily suggested, her voice laced with fear. "He must have been scared. We need to find him, Tom." We spent the next hour searching his apartment, hoping for any sign of him. I rummaged through his belongings while Emily paced the room. My heart sank with each passing minute, each moment filled with the heavy realization that Jake might be in grave danger. "Let's call his phone again," I said, pulling my phone out. I dialed his number, but all I got was the same empty, soulless voicemail greeting. "Still off," I said, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Emily sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "What if something happened to him? What if he's—" Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "He's not dead, Emily. We can't think like that." "We'll find him," I said, trying to sound reassuring, even though my own doubts gnawed at me. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. She looked at the screen, her expression shifting from despair to confusion. "It's a message from an unknown number," she said, her voice trembling. "Open it," I urged, leaning in closer. Emily hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. "What if it's—" "Just open it," I snapped, feeling the panic beginning to seep through my own composure. With a deep breath, she tapped the message open. Her eyes widened as she read it out loud. "You shouldn't have seen it. He belongs to us now." "Who is this?" I demanded, my heart racing. "What does this mean?" "I don't know," Emily said, her voice shaking. "But it sounds like whoever took Jake is watching us." "This is insane," I muttered, pacing the room. "We need to go to the police." "Do you really think they'll help?" she replied, her skepticism evident. "They might dismiss us as crazy kids who are just scared." "Better than doing nothing," I shot back. "We can't just sit here and wait for something worse to happen." Emily's fear was palpable as she stood up, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting something to jump out at us. "Fine, but if they don't believe us, I don't know what else we can do." We left Jake's apartment, the weight of despair heavy on our shoulders. As we walked toward the police station, the world around us felt different. The sky was overcast, shadows seemed to stretch longer, and every rustle of leaves made me jump. I could almost feel the eyes of something lurking in the darkness, watching our every move. When we arrived at the station, the officer at the front desk looked up from his computer, raising an eyebrow at the sight of two visibly shaken students. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone flat. We need to report a missing person," I stammered, my confidence wavering. "Who's missing?" he asked, tapping his pen against the desk. "Jake Thompson. He disappeared after we watched this." I hesitated, glancing at Emily, who was biting her lip. "This tape. It's complicated." The officer leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "A tape? Like a movie or something? What does that have to do with him being missing?" "Listen, it's not just a movie," Emily interjected, her voice rising with urgency. "We found it at a thrift store, and there's something wrong with it. Jake is missing, and we think it's connected." The officer smirked, clearly unimpressed. "Kids do this all the time. They see a horror movie, get scared, and then freak out. Is he really missing? Or is he just off with friends?" "No, it's not like that," I insisted, desperation creeping into my tone. "He wouldn't just leave like this. You have to believe us." The officer sighed, shaking his head. "I can take a report, but unless you have evidence of foul play, there's not much we can do." I felt the walls closing in around me, my frustration boiling over. What if it were your kid? Wouldn't you want someone to take it seriously? "Look, I get it, but unless you have more to go on, we're not a babysitting service. You need to file a missing persons report and wait," he said, dismissing us with a wave of his hand. Emily's face fell, and I could see the defeat in her eyes. "This isn't helping," she murmured, stepping back from the counter. As we exited the police station, the weight of helplessness settled on us like a heavy shroud. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe we should go to the library. There has to be something about that tape or the cult." Emily nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "Right, let's find out what we're dealing with." We made our way to the library, the air thick with tension as we entered the dimly lit room filled with rows of dusty books. The smell of old paper was comforting, yet the unease lingered. We approached the front desk, where an elderly librarian peered at us over her glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice raspy. "We're looking for information on a cult that might have been active in this area," I said, trying to sound as composed as possible. "Cult, you say?" Her brow furrowed, and she leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of cult?" "The kind that sacrifices people," Emily added, her tone dark. "There's something sinister going on, and we think it's connected to this tape we found." The librarian's expression changed, a flicker of recognition flashing in her eyes. "There have been rumors for years," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Disappearances, strange rituals in the woods. It's all very hush-hush. Can you help us find records or anything?" I asked, my heart racing. "Follow me," she said, leading us to a back room filled with archives. "I'll see what I can dig up." As she searched through the boxes, Emily and I exchanged worried glances. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. "I just want to find Jake," I said softly, my voice cracking. "We will," Emily replied, her eyes resolute despite the fear swirling within her. "We have to." The librarian returned with a few dusty files and laid them on the table. "Here are some reports on missing persons from the last few decades. You might find the air in the forest felt thick, almost alive, as Emily and I ventured deeper into the darkness. The sun had set, leaving us cloaked in shadows, with only the faint glow of our flashlights to guide us. I could hear the crunch of leaves beneath our feet, a sound that seemed to echo louder than it should have in the eerie silence of the woods. Every rustle, every whisper of the wind sent shivers down my spine, heightening my anxiety. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, glancing at Emily. Her face was pale, illuminated only by the beam of my flashlight. She nodded, her expression resolute yet tinged with fear. "I have to know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to find Jake. He wouldn't just disappear. There has to be something here that can help us." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of our situation. The memories of the VHS tape flooded back to me. The ominous rituals, the hooded figures, the chilling whispers that seemed to linger in my mind. I had never believed in the supernatural, but something about this night felt different. Felt like we were being watched. As we walked, the trees around us grew denser, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I pointed my flashlight at the ground, hoping to find some sign of Jake, but all I could see were the shadows dancing in the light. "Look," Emily said suddenly, her voice a mix of excitement and fear. She knelt down, brushing away leaves to reveal strange markings etched into the dirt. "These symbols, they look like the ones from the tape." I crouched beside her, my heart racing as I examined the symbols. They were intricate, almost beautiful in a horrifying way, and they seemed to pulse with an energy that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "What do they mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," Emily replied, biting her lip, "but they must be connected to the cult. This is where they performed their rituals." Just as I was about to respond, I felt a chill sweep through the air, cutting through the warmth of our earlier determination. "Emily, did you feel that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "We should keep moving. We can't stay here." As we continued deeper into the forest, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the very woods were alive, breathing around us. The whispers I had dismissed earlier began to grow louder, weaving in and out of our thoughts, taunting us. I could almost make out words, but they were too distorted to comprehend. "Do you hear that?" I asked, stopping in my tracks. Emily paused, her breathing quickening. "Yes, sounds like chanting." I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. "We should turn back. This isn't right." "No," she said firmly, her eyes ablaze with determination. "We have to find out what happened to Jake. We can't leave him." I felt a surge of panic rise within me, but I knew I couldn't let her go alone. "Okay, but let's be careful." As we moved cautiously through the trees, the chanting grew louder, wrapping around us like a fog. It was rhythmic, hypnotic, and it seemed to beckon us closer to its source. My heart raced as we approached a clearing, the moonlight spilling into the space like a spotlight. What we saw made my blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of hooded figures, their backs turned toward us. They swayed gently, arms raised to the sky as they chanted in unison. The air was thick with an unnatural energy, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. "Jake," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. I could see her eyes scanning the figures, searching for any sign of her friend. "Emily, we need to go," I urged, grabbing her arm. "This isn't safe." But before I could pull her away, one of the figures turned slightly, and I caught a glimpse of its face beneath the hood. It was not a face at all, but a void, a dark, swirling mass where features should have been. My breath hitched in my throat, and I stumbled back, dragging Emily with me. "What was that?" she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking, "but we need to get out of here. Now." Just as we turned to leave, another figure stepped forward, and I felt a surge of energy ripple through the air. The chanting intensified, echoing in my mind, drowning out my thoughts. I stumbled, trying to regain my composure, but the sound grew louder, pressing against my skull. "Jake!" Emily screamed, breaking free from my grip. She surged forward, her eyes fixated on the figures. "Jake, I'm coming for you." "Emily, no!" I shouted, panic flooding my veins as I lunged after her. But it was too late. She was already crossing into the circle, and the moment she stepped inside, the chanting stopped. Silence fell over the clearing, heavy and oppressive. The figures turned to face her, and I felt a cold wave wash over me. It was as if the very air had frozen, and I could see the fear mirrored in Emily's wide eyes. "Emily!" I cried, rushing forward. But as I stepped closer to the circle, a force pushed against me, like an invisible barrier. I stumbled back, my heart racing. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice a mixture of desperation and terror. She was surrounded by the figures, and I could see their hands reaching out, not to help, but to claim. "Get away from her!" I yelled, my voice breaking. I pounded against the barrier, but it held firm. I could feel the darkness closing in, the weight of the forest pressing down on me. Then, out of nowhere, a figure emerged from the shadows, gliding toward Emily. I could see it more clearly now, its hood falling back to reveal a face. Jake's face. But it was not the Jake I knew. His eyes were hollow, devoid of life, and a chilling smile crept across his lips. "Jake!" I shouted, my heart sinking. "What happened to you?" He turned to me, his voice distorted, echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have watched the tape. Let her go!" I demanded, desperation clawing at my throat. "You don't have to do this." But he only laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "It's too late. She's already part of it. Just like me." Emily's screams filled the air, a sound that pierced through the darkness. "Jake, please. I know you're in there. Fight it." But he didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer to the figures, and I could see them encircling her, their hands reaching out as if to pull her into their dark embrace. Panic surged through me, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "No, Emily!" I screamed, throwing myself against the barrier again, but it held strong. I could feel the energy radiating from it, an oppressive force that pushed me back as if the very essence of the forest was against me. Then, just as I thought I would lose her, Emily collapsed to the ground, her body going limp. "Emily!" I cried, my voice breaking. I felt tears streaming down my face as I watched the figures close in around her. "Jake, stop. You can't let them take her," I begged, my voice hoarse with desperation. He turned to me, the flicker of recognition in his eyes momentarily breaking through the darkness. "Help her," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing chant. "Before it's too late." But before I could respond, the figures lunged forward, enveloping Emily in their dark embrace. The screams that erupted from her lips echoed through the clearing, piercing my heart with a pain I had never known. "No!" I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat as I charged forward, desperate to break through the barrier. But it was futile. I was trapped, forced to watch as the darkness consumed her, just as it had consumed Jake. As their figures closed in, I felt my heart shatter, the weight of helplessness crashing over me like a tidal wave. The chanting resumed, louder and more insistent, drowning out my thoughts and my cries. I was losing them both, swallowed by the very darkness we had sought to uncover. And in that moment, I realized the truth of the tape, a curse that had ensnared us all, and I was powerless to stop it. I stood there, staring blankly at the phone in my hand, my heart racing. Emily was pacing back and forth in my small living room, her hands tugging at her hair in frustration. It had been 2 days since Jake had vanished, and the more we tried to piece together what had happened, the more tangled our thoughts became. "Why won't he pick up? This is insane," Emily exclaimed, her voice breaking slightly. "He should have been back by now." "I don't know, Em. It doesn't make sense," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I was trying to keep my head clear, but the anxiety was creeping in like a fog. Maybe he just went somewhere without telling us? Without telling us? Come on, this isn't like him." She stopped pacing and faced me, her eyes wide with worry. "He would have at least sent a text." "Something's wrong." I nodded, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I had to admit, the last time I saw Jake, he seemed off. It was right after we watched that cursed tape, and he had made those ridiculous jokes to lighten the mood. But the laughter had felt forced, and now I was regretting that we hadn't taken the warning on the tape more seriously. "Let's go to his place," I suggested, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Maybe he's just..." I don't know, sulking or something. Emily grabbed her jacket. Fine, let's go. But if I find him just sitting there, I swear I'll kill him. We drove to Jake's apartment in tense silence, the weight of our fears hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The familiar streets felt foreign, the trees lining the road swaying ominously as if they were whispering secrets. When we arrived, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, an unsettling sight that sent a chill down my spine. "Jake?" I called out hesitantly as we stepped inside, the door creaking ominously behind us. "Are you in here?" No answer, just silence. "Jake?" Emily tried again, and this time her voice cracked. She stepped further into the dimly lit room, her eyes scanning every corner. The disarray of his living space surprised me. It was usually so tidy. Now, clothes were strewn across the floor, and empty pizza boxes littered the coffee table. "What the hell?" I murmured, stepping closer to the table. My eyes caught something, a water bottle half full and a notebook lying open. I picked it up, flipping through the pages until I found a drawing that made my stomach drop. It was a crude sketch of a figure in a hooded cloak, surrounded by swirling symbols. "Look at this," I said, showing it to Emily, who had wandered into the small kitchen. She gasped, her face paling. That's the same thing we saw in the video. This is bad. Jake wouldn't draw this unless he was scared." I finished for her, the realization hitting me like a punch. "We need to figure out what's going on." We searched the rest of the apartment, but it was clear that Jake was nowhere to be found. I tried to call his phone again, but it went straight to voicemail. Desperation clawed at my chest. "Let's check the library," I suggested, grabbing my jacket. "Maybe someone there knows something." As we drove to the library, the unease settled in my stomach like a stone. The streets seemed to grow darker, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Once we arrived, I spotted the old librarian, Mr. Henderson, pushing his glasses up his nose as he sorted through a pile of books. He looked up, startled, when we approached him. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "No, not really," I admitted, glancing at Emily for support. "Our friend Jake is missing, and we think it might have something to do with this old tape we found. You wouldn't believe the things we've seen." Mr. Henderson's expression shifted, his brow furrowing. "A tape? What kind of tape?" I hesitated, but then decided to share the details. "It had a warning on it, said not to watch it. But we did, and now Jake is gone." He sighed deeply, leaning against the counter. "There have been stories of a curse tied to a tape like that. People disappearing. It's an old legend around here." "Legend?" Emily interrupted, her voice rising. "You mean to tell us this is some kind of myth?" "No, my dear. People have gone missing, young people especially, all connected to the same cult that used to operate in these parts. They believed in dark rituals and sacrifices," Mr. Henderson explained, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you watch the tape, it may have awakened something that desires to claim a soul." I felt a cold wave wash over me. "You can't be serious." "I wish I weren't," he replied gravely. "But it's true. The cult used to gather in the woods. They performed rituals to summon dark forces. And those who witnessed their rites often, well, they became part of it." Emily's face turned ashen. "What do we do? How do we find Jake?" Mr. Henderson's eyes softened with pity. "You must be careful. If you are determined to find him, you need to go to the woods. But be warned, the spirits of the cult may not take kindly to your intrusion." We exchanged fearful glances, the weight of his words pressing down on us. "We need to talk to people who remember," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "Maybe they can help us." As we left the library, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. The streets were eerily quiet, and I felt like we were moving through a dream or a nightmare. We approached a group of older residents sitting on a porch, their faces lined with stories of the past. "Excuse me," I called out hesitantly. "Do you know anything about a cult that used to be around here?" They looked at each other, a mix of fear and recognition crossing their faces. One of the older men, a wiry figure with a scruffy beard, leaned forward. You've heard the stories. They're not just stories, you know. They were real. We used to see them in the woods at night, chanting and dancing around fires. Why didn't anyone stop them? Emily asked, her voice filled with frustration. The man shook his head. We tried, but no one believed us. They had a hold on the town, and those who spoke up, they disappeared. Disappeared? I echoed, my heart racing. Like Jake. Yes, another woman chimed in, her voice trembling. Like many others. They believed they were chosen, you see. They would take someone and perform dark rituals to gain power. Power? I questioned, my mind racing. What kind of power? Power over life and death, the man said darkly. They believed they could summon forces beyond our understanding. And those who watched the tapes, they were marked. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and the dread settled heavily in my stomach. What do we do? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. How do we stop this? You can't, the woman said softly, her eyes filled with sorrow. Once you're marked, it's too late. You have to leave this town. Leave it all behind, but leaving felt impossible. Jake was still out there, and I wouldn't abandon him. As we drove back home, I could feel the weight of the town pressing down on us. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Emily was unusually quiet, her eyes glued to the passing trees. Do you think we'll find him? She finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I have to believe we will, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We just need to figure out what this cult wants and how to break the curse. But deep down, a gnawing fear began to take root. What if we were too late? What if Jake was already lost to whatever darkness lay within that cursed tape? The thought made my stomach churn as we pulled into my driveway, uncertainty swirling in my mind. The air was thick with unspoken dread as I sat in Emily's cramped apartment, the flickering light from the lamp casting elongated shadows across the walls. The remnants of our investigation cluttered the coffee table. A mix of newspaper clippings, scribbled notes, and the ominous VHS tape that had started this nightmare. I could still hear the echo of the eerie chants from the tape in my mind, a haunting melody that seemed to linger long after the screen had gone dark. Emily paced the room, her brow furrowed in concentration. We should have never watched that tape, she muttered, running her fingers through her hair. What were we thinking? I don't know, Emily. Curiosity got the better of us, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The guilt weighed heavily on my chest. I could see the flicker of anger and fear in her eyes, a dangerous combination that made me uneasy. But we can't keep blaming ourselves. We need to find Jake. Her gaze snapped to me, a mix of determination and desperation. You don't get it, do you? This is all our fault. He's gone because of us. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. I know, but we can't lose ourselves in guilt. We need to focus on finding him. Emily lowered her gaze, and for a moment, silence enveloped us, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the city outside. I watched her, feeling the tension between us prickling in the air. The once lively and adventurous friend I knew was slipping away, replaced by a haunted version of herself. The next few days felt like an eternity. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping that Jake would somehow reappear, that this was all just a terrible nightmare. But reality was unforgiving. Emily and I were trapped in a waking horror, and with each passing hour, the weight of Jake's absence grew heavier. It was on the third night when the air in the apartment changed. I was sprawled on the couch, staring blankly at the wall as Emily fidgeted on her phone, alternating between scrolling through social media and refreshing her messages. I could sense her growing frustration. Why hasn't he called? It's been days, she exclaimed, tossing her phone onto the table. He should have at least reached out to us. Maybe he's scared, or maybe he can't, I suggested, my voice tinged with uncertainty. What if he's in trouble? What if he's... I couldn't finish the thought. Emily's face paled, her eyes wide with fear. Don't say that. We have to believe he's okay. He's just lost. I sighed, nodding in agreement, but doubt gnawed at my insides. I remembered the frantic look on Jake's face during the last moments we shared, the way he seemed to understand something we didn't. The next morning, Emily confided in me about a dream she'd had the previous night. "I saw Jake," she said, her voice trembling. "He was in a dark place, surrounded by those figures from the tape. He was screaming for help, but I couldn't reach him." My heart sank at the vivid imagery her words conjured. "What do you think it means?" "I think he's trying to tell us something. He's still alive, but he's in danger. We need to do something," she insisted, her eyes glistening with determination. "What can we do?" I asked, feeling hopeless. "The police don't believe us, and we're running out of options." Emily's expression hardened, a spark igniting in her eyes. "We go back to the forest. We have to confront whatever is out there. It's the only way we'll find the truth." I hesitated, the idea sending a chill down my spine. The forest was where it all began, where the tape had captured the dark rituals. But I also knew we had no other choice. "Okay, let's do it," I finally relented. That night, we gathered flashlights and made our way to the outskirts of town. The moon shrouded by clouds. The forest loomed ominously ahead, its silhouette jagged against the starless sky. My heart raced with each step, the rustling leaves whispering warnings that echoed in my mind. As we entered the woods, the atmosphere shifted, thickening with an unshakable dread. "Do you feel that?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Like we're not alone?" I nodded, a shiver running down my spine. "Yeah, it's like something's watching us." The deeper we ventured, the more pronounced the feeling became. Shadows flitted between trees, and the air grew colder, wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. "This place feels wrong," I muttered, glancing around nervously. Suddenly, Emily stopped in her tracks, her breath hitching in her throat. "Look," she pointed ahead. "Those symbols. They're just like the ones in the library." A cluster of trees stood before us, their trunks marked with the same twisted symbols we had seen in our research. My stomach churned as we approached, every instinct screaming for us to turn back. But there was no going back now. "This has to be where they performed the rituals," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Emily stepped closer, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "What if Jake is here? What if he's—" "Emily, wait!" I shouted, grabbing her arm as she moved closer to the symbols. "We don't know what's going to happen." But it was too late. The moment she touched one of the carvings, the ground trembled beneath our feet. A low rumble echoed through the trees, and I felt a surge of energy that made my skin crawl. "Run!" I yelled, pulling Emily back as shadows danced around us, figures emerging from the darkness. They were cloaked in black, their faces hidden beneath hoods, and they moved with an otherworldly grace. "What do we do?" Emily screamed, panic etched in her features. "We can't stay here," I shouted, dragging her away from the symbols. We stumbled through the underbrush, branches clawing at our skin, the figures following closely behind, their whispers growing louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to seep into my very soul. Just when I thought we'd escaped, Emily collapsed to the ground, her eyes wide with terror. I can't breathe," she gasped, her hands clutching her chest. "Emily, stay with me," I urged, kneeling beside her. "You have to get up. Jake, I saw him again," she murmured, her voice distant. "He's in so much pain. They won't let him go." "Focus on my voice, Emily," I pleaded, shaking her gently. "We need to get out of here." Suddenly, she jolted upright, her eyes filled with an unsettling clarity. "He's calling for us. He needs us," she said, her tone eerily calm. "Emily, we can't." But she cut me off, her voice rising with urgency. "We have to go back. We have to save him." Before I could respond, she sprinted back toward the ominous symbols, her resolve unwavering. "Emily, wait, please," I shouted, fear coursing through me as I chased after her. As we neared the clearing, the figures began to emerge from the shadows, their presence suffocating. My heart raced as I watched Emily step forward, a look of determination etched on her face. "Jake!" she called, her voice echoing through the trees. Where are you? The air crackled with palpable energy, and I felt a pull toward the center of the clearing, where the ground was stained with dark earth. Get back! I screamed, sensing the danger that lurked just beyond our sight. But Emily was already lost in the moment, her eyes scanning the darkened woods for any sign of our friend. Jake, we're here, she cried out, desperation lacing her words. A chilling wind whipped through the forest, sending shivers down my spine. The figures drew closer, their whispers growing louder, drowning out Emily's calls. I could feel the darkness closing in around us, and panic surged through my veins. Emily, we have to leave. Now! I shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. This isn't safe. She hesitated, her gaze locked on the shadows. But Jake, he's not here. Not like this. I insisted, feeling the pressure of the unseen eyes upon us. We can't help him if we get ourselves killed. Finally, I managed to pull her away from the clearing, and as we stumbled back into the trees, the whispers faded into the distance. We ran blindly through the forest, the ground uneven beneath our feet, until we burst out into the open air, gasping for breath. As we reached the edge of the woods, I looked back, fear gnawing at my insides. Did we lose them? I panted, my heart racing. Emily leaned against a tree, her expression vacant. I don't know, but I can still feel him. He's out there, and we have to find him. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. The darkness of the forest loomed behind us, a reminder of the unknown horrors waiting. The moon hung high and full in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the twisted trees of the forest as Emily and I made our way deeper into the darkness. With each step, the weight of the impending confrontation pressed heavily on my chest. I could feel the damp earth beneath my shoes, and the cool night air sent shivers down my spine. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl, a reminder of the normality that felt worlds away from our current nightmare. Are you sure about this? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see her breath misting in the cold air, a sign of her own rising anxiety. I paused, glancing back at her. Her face was pale, illuminated by the moonlight, and I could see the shadows of fear dancing in her eyes. We have to do this, Em. We can't leave Jake behind. He's out there, somewhere. My voice was steady, but inside, doubt gnawed at me. What if we were too late? What if we couldn't save him? Taking a deep breath, I turned back to the path ahead. We've come this far. We can't turn back now. I pressed on, my heart racing with every step. Just a few hours ago, we had been poring over the details of the cult and the dark history that surrounded it. The stories we heard echoed in my mind like a chorus of warnings that were growing louder the closer we got to the ritual site. As we approached the designated area, I noticed the air growing thicker, heavier with an almost palpable tension. A chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I squinted into the darkness, searching for any movement. Do you feel that? I asked, my voice edged with urgency. Emily nodded, her eyes wide, scanning the trees. It's like something is out there. We pressed onward, the faint glow of the moon guiding us through the dense underbrush. The trees began to thin, revealing a small clearing. My heart sank as I took in the scene before us. Symbols carved into the earth surrounded a large, circular stone, and the air was thick with an unexplainable energy that vibrated in my bones. Is this it? Emily murmured, taking a hesitant step forward. This is where they did it, where they performed the rituals. I nodded, both in awe and horror. It's just like the images on the tape. I trailed off, my voice barely audible as I stepped closer. The symbols were jagged and menacing, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was as if they were alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Suddenly, a rustling sound broke the stillness, and we froze, our eyes darting around the clearing. My breath hitched in my throat as dark shapes began to emerge from the shadows. Figures cloaked in black began to encircle the clearing, their movements smooth and deliberate, like puppets on invisible strings. "Jake!" I shouted, my voice breaking through the fear that gripped me. "Where are you?" The figures turned toward us, and the air became electric with a presence that sent chills racing down my spine. Emily grabbed my arm tightly, her nails digging into my skin. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We confront them," I said, though my own heart raced with uncertainty. "We need to find Jake. We can't let them take him." As we stepped forward, I noticed one of the figures was different from the rest. My heart dropped as I recognized the familiar outline of Jake. He stood in the center of the circle, his face obscured in shadow, but there was something off about him. His posture was rigid, his head slightly bowed as if he were in a trance. "Jake!" I called again, desperation lacing my voice. "It's us, Emily and Tom. We're here to get you out." He lifted his head slowly, revealing eyes that were vacant and hollow. A shiver of dread washed over me. This was not the Jake I knew. "Tom, Emily," he murmured, his voice distant, as if he were speaking from a great distance. "You shouldn't have come here. What have they done to you?" Emily cried, stepping forward, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We're here to help you. Fight it, Jake." He shook his head slowly, the shadows clinging to him like a shroud. "You don't understand. I made a choice." His words sent a wave of nausea through me. "They offered me power, a way to be more than I was." "No!" I shouted, my frustration boiling over. "You can't mean that. We're your friends, Jake. We can find a way to break this." The cloaked figures began to close in, their movements synchronized, like a dark tide rising to swallow us whole. "You have to leave," he said, his voice now laced with a haunting sense of finality. "You don't belong here." I took a step closer, my heart racing as I reached out toward him. "We're not leaving you, Jake. We're not giving up on you." But as I moved, the figures stepped forward, blocking my path. "You do not understand the power that dwells here," one of them hissed, their voice a chilling whisper that echoed in the night. "To break the curse, a sacrifice must be made." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A sacrifice?" she echoed, her eyes darting between me and Jake. "What do you mean?" The figure tilted its head, as if savoring her fear. "The chosen must embrace their fate. Only then can the others be freed." "No!" I shouted, anger surging within me. "This is insane. You can't take him. He's not yours to command." Jake's expression flickered with something. Was it regret? "You have to go," he said again, his voice strained. "This is not a game. You don't know what you're facing." "We can face it together," Emily insisted, stepping closer to him. "We won't let them take you." But the figures surged forward, their hands outstretched, and I felt a pull, a dark energy that threatened to drag us all into the abyss. "You cannot interfere," another figure growled, its voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Get away from him!" I yelled, my heart pounding in my chest. I lunged forward, desperate to reach Jake, but the figures were upon me, their cold, shadowy hands grabbing at my arms. I struggled against their grip, panic rising as I fought to break free. "Tom!" Emily screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. I turned just in time to see her being pulled back, her eyes wide with terror. "No! Let her go!" I felt the ground shift beneath my feet as the figures began to chant in a low, guttural language, their voices merging into an unholy symphony that made my skin crawl. The air crackled with dark energy, and a vortex of shadows began to swirl around us. "Please, Jake," I cried, desperation clawing at my throat. "We can find another way." His eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps, or maybe a spark of the friend I knew. "It's too late," he said, his voice breaking. "You need to leave, before it's too late for you too." Before I could respond, the ground shook violently, and the figures began to close in, their intentions unmistakable. With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from their grip and ran toward Emily, who was being held back by two shadowy figures. "Emily, hold on!" I shouted, reaching for her. But before I could grasp her hand, the vortex intensified, and a blinding light erupted from within the circle. The figures shrieked in unison, their forms wavering as the energy consumed them. "Tom!" Emily cried out, her voice filled with terror. "Help me!" I lunged toward her, but the blinding light enveloped us, and for a moment, everything was chaos. I could feel the energy pulling at me, trying to tear me apart. "No!" I screamed, reaching for Emily, but the light swallowed us whole. And then, just as quickly as it began, the darkness receded, and I found myself standing alone in the clearing, breathless and trembling. The ground was silent, and the only sound was the distant rustling of leaves. "Emily?" I called, my voice trembling. "Jake?" But there was no answer. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They were gone. The weight of despair settled over me like a shroud. I felt as if I had lost a piece of myself in that moment, stranded in a nightmare from which I could never wake. The air around us felt charged, as if we were standing at the edge of an unseen precipice. I could hardly breathe, my heart pounding heavily against my ribcage, echoing the chaos swirling in my mind. Emily and I stood at the edge of the clearing, where Jake had been drawn into the web of darkness that surrounded the cult's ritual. The flickering lanterns cast eerie shadows, and the whispers of the figures cloaked in darkness reached us like a chilling wind. "Jake?" I called out, my voice trembling as I stepped forward, desperately hoping to see a glimmer of the friend I once knew. But the figure before me was far from the Jake I remembered. His eyes, once filled with light and laughter, now seemed hollow, as if the very essence of his being had been siphoned away. "Jake, it's us, Emily and Tom," Emily shouted, her voice breaking slightly. I could see the hope in her eyes, but it was quickly tainted by fear. The shadows shifted, and I could feel the oppressive energy of the place weighing down on us. "Why did you come?" Jake's voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it echoed around us, bouncing off the trees in an unsettling way. He took a step closer, and I could see the remnants of his former self flickering behind the emptiness. "You shouldn't have come here. You can't save me. Stop it!" I yelled, desperation rising. "We're not leaving you. We can get you out of here. We'll find a way." My mind raced with thoughts of the tape, the curse, the sacrifices. The ritual we had witnessed in the video flashed before my eyes. A twisted game that had ensnared us all. "Tom, listen to him," Emily pleaded, her voice softening. "Maybe he's right. Maybe we can't save him." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and I could see the conflict tearing her apart. "No, Em, we can't give up," I shouted, anger bubbling over. "We have to fight this." The shadows seemed to thrum with energy at my words, as if feeding off my desperation. Jake shook his head, a pained expression crossing his face. "You don't understand. The tape, it binds me. I made a pact. I didn't know what it meant at the time. They told me it would give me power, that I could be someone important. But it cost me everything." His voice cracked, and I could see the anguish etched deep in his features. "What kind of power?" Emily asked, her curiosity grappling with her fear. "What do you mean?" "The power to see, to know things. But it's a curse. I didn't just watch the ritual. I became part of it. They're always watching, always waiting. And now they want a sacrifice." A chill ran down my spine. "A sacrifice? For what?" Jake's gaze turned sorrowful, and he looked away, unable to meet our eyes. "To complete the ritual. To gain control over the darkness. I'm the chosen one, but the price is too high. They need someone else to take my place." Emily stepped forward, her resolve hardening. "We won't let them take you, Jake. We'll figure it out together. We'll find a way to break this." A flicker of hope ignited in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished. "There's no breaking it. The only way to free me is to make a sacrifice. You have to choose, Tom. You have to choose who it will be. Either me or someone else." The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my stomach twist as I struggled to process what he was saying. But why? Why does it have to be like this?" "Because that's how it works." he shouted, frustration lacing his tone. I can't escape this unless someone else takes my place, and they won't let me go without a fight. Emily's face paled as the reality of the situation sank in. No, no, we're not going to sacrifice anyone. Then I'll be trapped here. Forever. Jake's voice cracked, and I could see the desperation in his expression. You don't understand what they'll do to me. I'll become one of them. You have to do this. Jake, please, I shouted, panic rising in my chest. We can find another way. Tom. Emily interrupted, her voice sharp and commanding. Listen to him. Maybe it's not just about him. Maybe we need to think about the greater good here. Are you really saying that, Em? I asked incredulously. You can't be serious. We're not sacrificing anyone. It's not just about us, she insisted, her eyes wild with emotion. What if this is the only way to stop whatever evil is happening? If Jake is right, then we're putting the entire town at risk. Think of what that tape has done. A silence enveloped us, heavy and suffocating. I could feel the shadows creeping closer, as if the darkness itself was waiting for our decision. Tom, Jake said, his voice softer now, you have to understand. If you let me go, I won't be the same. I'll be lost to them. But if you sacrifice me, it might break the curse. You could save everyone else. My heart raced, torn between my love for my friend and the moral implications of what we were discussing. The thought of sacrificing someone, of condemning them to a fate worse than death, made bile rise in my throat. Emily, I said, desperation creeping into my voice, you can't really think this is right. We can't just throw away a life for another. We can find another way, but the look in her eyes was resolute. I can't lose you both. I won't. I'd rather do this than watch you both become part of this darkness. No, I shouted, fear coursing through me. You can't. I won't let you. But as I looked into Jake's hollow eyes, I realized that we were running out of time. The shadows were closing in, and we were losing our chance to save him or ourselves. Tom, please, Jake said, his voice breaking. You have to choose. In that moment, I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. I looked to Emily, and the fear in her eyes mirrored my own. We were trapped in a web of darkness with no clear escape. I can't do it, I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. As if sensing our hesitation, the shadows surged forward, enveloping Jake, pulling him deeper into their grasp. You have to decide, he screamed, his voice filled with anguish. I can't hold them back for long. Emily, I said, my voice cracking, we can't give in to this darkness. We need to find a way to fight back. But Emily's gaze was intense, filled with a determination I hadn't seen before. Tom, listen to me. If we do nothing, we lose everything. I can't let you go down this path. I'd rather sacrifice myself than lose both of you. Emily, don't, I pleaded, panic rising within me. It's the only way, she insisted, tears streaming down her face. I love you both too much to let this darkness win. If I can save you, I will. No, I screamed, reaching for her. But the shadows were closing in, and I felt helpless against their pull. In a moment of desperation, Emily stepped forward, determination etched on her face. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. I'll be the sacrifice. Emily, don't, I shouted, but it was too late. She was already stepping into the circle, and the shadows surged around her, responding to her choice. Please, Tom, remember me, she called out, her voice echoing in the darkness. No, I screamed, reaching out in vain as the shadows consumed her. The last thing I saw was her face, a mixture of fear and resolve, before the darkness enveloped her completely. I stumbled back, my heart shattering into pieces. Emily, I cried, desperation clawing at my throat, but it was too late. The shadows receded, leaving me alone with Jake, who looked at me with a mixture of horror and sorrow. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I felt the weight of the world crashing down on me. I had lost Emily, my best friend, and the darkness had won. No, I gasped, collapsing to my knees. What have we done? Jake's expression shifted, the emptiness in his eyes replaced by a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Hope. It's not over yet, he said, a faint smile breaking through the despair. You can still break the curse. But I couldn't hear him. The darkness was closing in again, and all I felt was the crushing weight of my failure. I had lost everything. As the shadows enveloped me, I felt the darkness seep into my soul, and I knew that I would never escape this nightmare. I was left alone, a prisoner of my own choices, trapped between guilt and horror, knowing that the curse would continue, feeding on the lives of others.